This is the first time we've run a webinar on this topic, and we ran it just to recognize, really, that we were hearing many pharma companies talking about their aim to become an integrated healthcare provider. That can obviously mean a lot of things. We wanted to try and add some substance to that to see what people were actually doing. So this should be a very interesting session, and it's proven incredibly popular. I think we've actually hit a new record. We've got well over 1,000 people having registered, and I can see on my screen here that a large number of people have signed in live as well, which is absolutely fantastic. Just before we get going, just to make you aware, this webinar has actually been produced not only because of the demand, but also to launch our upcoming flagship Barcelona conference, which takes place in March next year. It was formerly two different events called SFE and one also called e-marketing. But these days, the silos between those two groups are being broken down. And really, this has become the destination event for the entire commercial pharma industry. We had over 1,000 people attend last year, and we expect a few more than that next time. So I'm not here to make a sales pitch, but I would look out, if I were you, for the program and agenda, which should be arriving within the next week or two, and have a look at whether or not you would like to come to Barcelona in March next year, because we'd obviously love to see you there. The theme of that event is the customer, and we're actually letting the customer take control of the event. The customer will be on the stage, and the customer has dictated a large amount of the agenda. So I think it's very apt, really, and fits quite well with the need to sell outcomes, not medicines. I think the two themes fit together very nicely indeed. I'll introduce our first speaker in just a moment, but first, something for you guys to do. Have a look at your screens, and you'll see a question, a little quick poll appear on the screen. Does your company want to be a healthcare provider? And really, I'm looking for the pharmaceutical companies to reply to this, obviously. So if you're not from a pharmaceutical company, please just choose the top option, which is I'm not working for a pharma company. And then underneath, our CEO believes this is our future. So we're looking for those companies that are very much aligned to this with a lot of conviction. This is the way they're going forward. Yes, but we're considering other options. So maybe this healthcare provider is not the top priority. It's one of several directions or several priorities that the company can see. Third one, I'm not sure. We have some major questions to overcome. So these are the companies, perhaps they've been going through some flux recently, perhaps they're parts of recent mergers, not quite sure about the overall direction. And then finally, this is for people who don't think this is where the company is going. My company doesn't believe this is the priority. Maybe your company has an absolutely fantastic pipeline and is planning to rely on those new drugs coming through for the next few years. And if that's the case, then choose that. So looks like we've got about 65–70% of people who have voted so far. I'll just give you 3 more seconds. Make your final choice. Right, let's have a look at the results, shall we? Right. That's interesting. So 60% of people are not working for a pharma company, but as for the rest, the highest proportion, 16%, believes this is our future. So that's just it's obviously not a very scientific poll, but I think it shows a certain amount of interest here that this is the way forward. Yes, but we're considering other options also at 12%, not sure at 11%. So there's some uncertainty still from quite a lot of you, and only 2%, although I guess that's more like 4 or 5%, if you strip out the non-pharma companies, don't believe that this is the priority. So that's an interesting starting point and perhaps a good frame for the rest of the session. Right, let's move on to the first speaker, who you can see from your list in front of you is Tyrone Edwards. Tyrone's been a long-standing friend of eyeforpharma's and of mine personally. He spent 26.5 years at Merck, which is an impressive stint. Finally left as senior vice president and was particularly involved in sales. Most recently, he's actually been responsible for his own healthcare consultancy called IMA Life Sciences, and I believe he's been doing some incredibly interesting work there. If you obviously want to find out more about that, then you can get in touch with him afterwards. So, Tyrone, I'm going to hand straight over to you, and Tyrone will deliver a short presentation for us.
Thank you so much, and greetings to everyone on the line. I'll take just a few moments to take a couple of slides to remind all of us of, given the various markets that are represented on this call, what are the conditions that are in place today that we have to think about as each of us as trying to provide value to our respective customers and stakeholders in each of our markets. And so on our first slide, this is just a reminder to all of us that in many markets, there are multiple changes that are afoot. For example, in the U.S., one of the biggest changes, obviously, to come along in the U.S. is the Affordable Care Act, which was recently upheld, many parts of it upheld by our largest court, which means that what it really means for us in the U.S. is that the bar around delivering on outcomes has been raised greatly, particularly health economic outcomes, as more and more reimbursements are tied to ability to achieve certain kinds of outcomes. In many markets represented on this call, the ability to get a new chemical entity approved in markets is no longer as certain as it once was. And so that is clearly an issue that is at the front of us. And the uncertainty oftentimes is not always tied to the efficacy of the new chemical entities that we are researching, but oftentimes it is tied to the health benefit and the health economic benefit of the entities that we are seeking to bring into in various markets. The less we're able to demonstrate a greater value proposition, that obviously puts a lot of pressure on the reimbursement models in the various markets, again, that are represented on this line. We also know that in many of the markets that are represented on this line, there's going to be an increasing, if not already increasing, use of electronic medical records, which then means that the ability to be able to track outcomes is only going to increase exponentially as more and more countries begin to standardize the use of electronic medical records. We also have seen that in many of the markets that we have had exposure to, there's a growing use of social media. And because there is a growing use of social media, pharma companies and healthcare companies are somewhat losing control of the opinions that they're able to help guide and shape for the healthcare providers. And so it is important for us in the industry to really understand social media and how better to manage it in order to help guide opinions and guide perceptions on the value that we can deliver in various markets. Let's take a look at our next slide. And on our next slide, what we tried to capture is dropping down from the concerns at the macro level of the industry, taking a little closer look at when we talk to healthcare providers in different markets, what are they telling us that are their top concerns? And the top three concerns that I've listed here are really pretty universal across many of the markets that we work in. And what we find is that providers continually are wanting to make sure that they are up to speed on the latest in technology, information, and data so that they can best serve the needs of their patients and their constituents. And in doing so, they are being able to bring value to their constituents and look smart to their constituents. It is also important that we think about how we help healthcare providers with the image that they're trying to build for themselves among their peer group. And that's going to vary from market to market, but it is awfully important that we think about, as we not only talk about our products, but the services that we bring to market, how do we make sure that the healthcare providers that we're targeting are able to build, again, their reputation within the market. We do know that optimization of time is a major issue with many of the healthcare providers that we talk to. This is especially true in the more mature markets that are represented on this call, because we're finding that in the more mature markets, physicians and providers are being asked to do more in order to maintain a level of reimbursement that they are used to, and that puts in a tremendous amount of pressure on how they optimize their time. We also know that in many markets, there's a big concern about the ability of the individual practitioner as well as the group or associations that they practice within, their ability to be able to generate sufficient reimbursement and income so that their business models are able to maintain profitability. So again, this really begs the question. These two slides beg the question: if you're sending your sales representatives in to talk to healthcare providers, what are they talking about? So let's take a look at our next slide. The traditional model on the next slide, has been that you would send your pharma sales representative in to talk to a healthcare provider about your product. And for many years, this approach has served our industry very well. In fact, we have lots of models that show the return on the value of having sales representatives promote our product. However, many of us, and I'm sure most of you on this call, have begun to see a flattening out of the value curve associated with standard traditional product promotion. And that means that the way that we are traditionally promoting our products to physicians is less and less valuable to our target audience. The result of this has been, because there's so many traditional pharmaceutical approaches and representatives in the market, and the targets are seeing less value, they are seeking other alternatives to understand value in the market. And that means that because of price pressures and our inability to always demonstrate value, that the traditional technology sometimes has begun to be more widely used in many markets because, again, we have failed to demonstrate true value beyond just the products that we represent. So it does beg the question, if the traditional model of using a pharma representative is beginning to lose its value and is no longer able to truly help us differentiate ourselves, our brands, and our approaches in the market, what is an alternative approach? How do we get our healthcare providers to see value in what we're offering beyond just the product themselves? So let's take a look at that on the next slide, and I believe this is my last slide, and this will set up the discussion that we want to have for the time that we have left. Our research shows that when you speak to customers and you ask them, how do you differentiate yourself in the market? We are finding that it's no longer just about the promotional messages and the individual products that we represent. So clearly what we've been able to find in our research is that the brands that we represent in the market account for 20% of the differentiation that we're able to create in the market. So that's still very good, but it means that each company has the opportunity to distinguish itself based on how you invest in your brand. The products and the services that we bring to market are still important today, but as you can see on this slide, 20% of the time we're able to create differentiation through the products and services that we bring to market. Now, this is particularly troublesome because many companies today still singularly rely on just their products to create differentiation in the market. But yet the customers are saying to us, products and services alone are not going to create differentiation in the market. The result of that is that when you look at and you ask customers of their perception of price to value, their price to value perception has dropped to now that it's only about 10% of the driver of differentiation. So the question becomes, how are we going to create differentiation in the market? And this the last bar in this slide really is the jumping off point or the speaking point for the rest of our time together. Because our research suggests that differentiation is going to come from the sales experience that as companies we're able to take out to our target audiences. And bear with me just a moment as I define a sales experience. Sales experience is our ability to deliver a unique perspective to our target audience. That unique perspective is not just about your product. The unique perspective is about your product, but more importantly, it's about the disease, the patient, and how the healthcare provider can more efficiently, effectively manage the disease and towards patient outcome. We also find that the experience is tied to our ability to be able to demonstrate and teach the provider something new. Now, teach here isn't in the context of the disease only themselves. Teach here is in the ability to be able to achieve outcomes differently than the standard approaches using older technologies that exist today. And then lastly, what our research finds is that the healthcare provider understands that there are a lot of alternatives in the market, and they're looking for someone to help them to understand the risk associated with the various alternatives and to help them to avoid potential mistakes, which obviously are detrimental to patient outcomes, but also their reimbursement model. So all of this suggests that for pharma companies, we have to begin to think of how do we service our value proposition beyond just the product and think about different approaches beyond just the product itself and to ramp up the service side of our products and solutions that we take to market. So let me stop there, and Paul, I'll turn it back to you to open up for further discussion.
Thank you very much, Tyrone. So that has indeed given us a good foundation. 53%, that number there, it's not insignificant at all. At this stage, I want to introduce two more people into the mix. We have Per Hillen. Per is the corporate vice president at Leo and works in Denmark, not very far away from where I am now, and has been with the company for many years, since 1995, I believe. And I won't speak for him, but I think that some of the patient-centric approaches that his company has been taking is of real interest. I also want to introduce Dick Costa. Dick's calling us from the Netherlands, works for GSK, and we first found out about Dick because he's currently working on an incredibly interesting project, an IT project, which I think provides a very nice practical demonstration of many of the possibilities that Tyrone has just hinted at. So very interested to hear more about that. And Dick's been with, GSK and formerly Glaxo since 1979, and obviously has a great history of working in that company, and I believe his project has been many years in the making, so be very interested to have a look at that. I want to start the discussion by remembering that this is a much bigger discussion than just the three of the speakers that we have here today. We have several hundred people on the line at the moment, and you've all joined live because this gives you the opportunity to ask questions yourself. So please do have a look at the right-hand side of your screen where you'll see the ability to ask questions. We will throw those questions in and make sure that the most interesting ones get answered. I would like to encourage everybody, that means you, to try and ask one question at least, and make sure that we're personally delivering on the information that you want to hear. But let me start the conversation by just going to Per and asking if you can just give us a quick overview of what it is that you've done in your company to meet some of the necessary changes that Tyrone has just outlined.
Thank you, Paul. I think, first of all, thank you also very much, Tyrone, for your presentation. Linking to Tyrone and the parts that he has presented, in Leo we are moving very much with the Challenger sale or the way of working that Tyrone presented. A couple of years ago, we launched in Leo what we call the patient-centric approach, and I think that on every web page and everywhere, every company you look, you probably find that we are patient-centric and trying to put the patient in the center. We do that the same, but try to limit and put the patient in the center in everything we do. And if it doesn't really support a patient in the end, that is the thing that we don't do. If we try and look a little bit on what that really means, that means that a major part of the initiatives that we are going for are different kind of patient support programs or patient programs. In this phase, mainly piloting, but we have also been through a couple of pilots and where we actually can see the results. But there is no question about it that, as Tyrone said, we are on a threshold or a crossroad where we should actually need to find new revenue streams. And I don't think it actually depends if you have a good pipeline or not. I think most companies will put up a complete solution pack and go one way or another down the healthcare path going forward.
Okay, thank you. And before we respond to some of those things, and you've already thrown up some interesting ideas there, Per, I want to just allow Dick to come in, and if we can just get a quick overview, Dick, on the project that you have been working on and what it's intended to do.
Yes. There are a few starting points in thinking about IT solutions. One of the major issues in the past was the compliance to drug therapy. It later developed into a complete software tool which could give doctors insight in their quality. So what we are adding is the value to the doctor that he can assess his treatment on every single issue between the treatment. So he can look at the therapy, at the compliance, at the adherence, the process. He can look at outcome. And if we keep in mind that treatment is supposed to improve patients' life, is to improve the illness, to improve the situation, to delay progress, you can understand that if the doctor has insight and is learning, like Tyrone already said, is learning from his findings on his individual patients, the patient will benefit with a better quality of life. So adding value in the sense of insight in patient outcome, patients will get a better treatment and a better outcome and a better quality of life. And that's the second point from the starting, so servicing the doctors, that is that if you improve patients' life, they get less exacerbations or complications, and that will be beneficial to the healthcare insurers. They they pay for the performance, and if you have less complications, you have to pay less. So they might end up with a higher drug bill in the beginning, but in the end, they will end up with a lower overall cost for the patient. So not only treatment, also process can be improved, and all these issues together make that we think that GSK can benefit from that, not by selling drugs, but we think that the salespersons, the sales reps, will, let's say, develop from a sales rep to more a counselor, a consultant, and they will talk about the whole treatment. They can offer support, they can offer education, but they can also offer software tools running on this engine, so to say, giving more insight on specific things or insight on progress in treatment or in changes in treatment, change in outcome and whatsoever. So we believe that insight in treatment will benefit everyone in the chain. So that's yep. What actually it links to Tyrone's presentations quite well.
Okay. I'm getting a few questions through, which is fantastic. A lot of people are asking about specific examples and particularly about metrics. Can we obtain or create metrics around true patient outcomes? One person from Canada, for example, says we don't have access to these metrics as they're owned by government. We've made attempts to partner with government to acquire these data, but with limited success. I imagine that's an isolated situation, but in general, I imagine everybody measures the effectiveness of this in a different way. Now, Dick, I know that you've got perhaps something that you can show us that might enable people to visualize what it is you're actually doing, and maybe if you can talk about how that gets measured, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can show, but just before I show that, we have different levels of information. The software, which you are now seeing, when it's good, I'm not seeing it myself. Yes, there it is, I suppose. Do you see the software, the screen?
Yeah, we can see that.
Well, this is what is running in a practice. Physically, it's on the computers of the doctor. So he is the owner of the data, and we, as a pharmaceutical company, don't get the data. If we want data, we must sign a contract with the doctors, and we might get in let's say, in a project situation, get the data anonymized. But this is what the doctor sees. What you here see is the compliance information dashboard. You can see how diabetes is treated with insulin, with the TZDs or metformin or the SU derivatives and statins. And it all shows how many patients are really compliant. For example, if I look at the metformin, you see 73 patients are taking the drug, and 71% is compliant to 80 to 100% of the time. So there is still some improvement possible within these subgroups. So this is the metrics for the drug use, which is visible for the doctor. If you look at outcome, for example, we have several data, for example, the fasting glucose, the cholesterol, which it shows the average value and, for example, the percentage of patients measured. So this is all on basis of patients in the practice. This is the average value of the practice, and you can go on. You can down-drill to individual patients and look at their individual data. We also have overviews, whatever, analysis. Another way, we have several types of analysis which makes you see how you are performing. Now, the question of getting the metrics is two ways. For the doctor, it says that he is doing it in a way that he will be satisfied. Will settle with it, how he's doing. We also have a level on an aggregated level. Aggregated data, but anonymized. So in groups, you see those data coming up and you can compare several practices. There's another project running in which GSK is involved, and that's called the Mondrian project. And in this project, many different physicians and groups and also healthcare insurers provide data to a university. And the genuine engine below this will be inside the software, the inside the engine. This will generate data and upload it to this Mondrian project, which is a data mining system, actually. So there are several ways of getting data out. For us, it's very important to be able to talk with the doctor about this kind of data and help him to interpret the data and to adopt his therapy and, if necessary, of course, and help him with measures to reorganize his practice and optimize, in the end, the time taken to treat the patient. Did I answer the question?
Well, I guess our audience will be the decider of that. If people want more detail on that or have more questions for Dick, then please do just ask it on the right-hand side. For the time being, I just want to move back to Tyrone, but thank you very much, Dick, for that quite useful overview you've given there. Tyrone, a lot of people reacting to your speech saying it was very, very useful and very good to see those numbers and congratulating you on the research. I think a lot of people are hitting a brick wall when it comes to the practical application despite their efforts. For example, one person says, how does Pharma achieve the transformation of field activities you so succinctly illustrated in light of government restrictions on what can and cannot be discussed by Pharma reps with HCPs? Another person, how can this be realized with the regulatory restrictions or interpretation some companies have of the regulatory area when it comes to representatives discussing points and information that's considered outside of what's in the primary indication? That seems to be the pushback and why reps still discuss the key messages. So some internal resistance there. Do you have any comments while realizing that none of us here are regulatory professionals, but do you have anything to say on that?
To me, I think there are three overarching points I would make to those questions. The bigger point that I'd like to make is that I believe that it is in the interest of pharma companies to make sure that they're investigating channel tools that are beyond just the traditional representative. So I agree with many of the comments about how hard it is in many markets because of regulatory restrictions for the sales representative to deliver on the sales experience that I talked about. The thing to remember is that sales experience that I'm talking about isn't only delivered through your professional representative. That's my first point. My second point, in terms of if you're using sales representatives, I think you have to parse out or to think about your sales professionals in different types of capacity. You still will have traditional sales representatives, but many companies now are taking some of their traditional capacity and reallocating that capacity to more patient-centered capacity. So patient educators, people that are managing patient advocacy groups, people that are working with medical groups on how they think about their own treatment pathways within their group practices. So it's really thinking about reallocating some of that capacity to some of the service model that I'm talking about. Then the last thing I'll speak to is for the traditional representative. While it is important that in many markets, when you talk specifically about your drug, you have to stay within your label. That is absolutely true, and I'm not advocating anything other than that. However, what I am advocating is that how do you get your traditional representative to be able to deliver what I call insight? And insight isn't about your drug, but it's about how you get the physician to think about the disease, the patient, and coming up with alternative ways of thinking about the disease compared to what I call status quo. Status quo is how they use traditional or existing technology to treat a disease or a patient. And now challenging the status quo is getting them to reorient of their thinking. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about. Someone mentioned the diabetic patient earlier. We know that with juvenile diabetic patients, many times juvenile diabetic patients have breakthroughs at night. And so the question we want to get physicians to think about, if diabetic patients who are juvenile have breakthroughs at night, how do you reorient your thinking about monitoring and measuring the impact on hemoglobin A1C at night for those juvenile patients? By posing that kind of question, you may force the physician to think differently about how they go about treating the disease, which might lead them down a different path than just thinking about traditional insulin shots. Let me stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Tyrone. I think that was a really nice 3 points you gave there, and I hope a lot of you people jotted those down. I'm getting a lot of questions just going back to what Dick presented, asking Dick where he's getting his data from. I'd like to go to Per, but just before that, Dick, can you just enlighten us a little?
Yes, well, as I said, this software is installed in the practice, so the data are always remain in the practice, so physically, and are only visible to the healthcare providers in that office. So if we're doing some projects, as we did, for example, for osteoporosis, where compliance is a major issue, we create an output format, in this case Excel, in which all individual patient data are deleted, and we only get the outcome data.
Okay, but where does the data originally arrive from? What is the source? Does the doctor have to input that data himself, or what?
The source is the GP system. We are able to extract the rough data from every GP system available in the Netherlands, which are 12 in this small country. We're able to extract these data, and these are loaded into a Fiber database, which is connected to these dashboards. Okay,
thank you. Again, if you've got more questions for Dick, then keep asking on the right-hand side of your screen. But let me come to Per, who's had a little bit of a break. We're getting quite a few questions about the ultimate ROI and the outcomes that can be expected from taking these kind of approaches. Because your approach is so company-wide, and you're to be commended for that, but obviously the company needs to prove itself, and so I'm just very interested in that. And also, we have a very strong audience who come from the traditional patient adherence area. We've mentioned adherence a couple of times, but we've got quite a few questions surrounding the improvements to adherence as a result of having these kind of approaches. So, if you can talk about overall ROI, overall outcomes, and adherence, then that would be great.
Yes, sure, I can try that. As I said, we during 2011 we launched around 60 different pilots globally around patient initiatives. I think two of the major parts that we have been able to look back on is one part of being integrated care, meaning joining forces with external providers. And in this case, we have an example where we actually joined forces and started or set up 200 external centers, meaning physician clinics, where we channeled patients from different parts of the regions around these centers into the centers, where we had the possibility to see to have a little bit of more of a 360 approach to the patient and the patient needs, looking into the burden of disease and the burden of treatment, and then of course also what it actually meant for patients and why patient had not succeeded with the treatment before, and just actually added, you can say, more of a human or holistic aspect to this. We managed to see that by disrupting the cycle of, you could say, repeat prescribing, it actually delivers greater opportunity for patients to experience improved treatment solutions. And what we saw in this, which is included around 12,000 patients, we actually managed to change the normal around 25% of disruptive behavior to around 65%. That actually change drugs to new options. Not meaning our drugs, preferably, of course, but it actually goes for the drugs that are the market leaders in the specific area. We actually could see that when we look back on and measured the patient satisfaction, we achieved to have around 95-96% of patient satisfaction after treatment, which of course also means that you increase or sustain compliance within the patient. And even though this was a costly project, first of all, linking up with an external provider, setting the whole thing on the road, we could still see that we have beneficially, because we were the market leaders, we could still see that we had an ROI already on the first year. The second part of this is more of the patient support programs, which you could say is the more holistic setting up patients with either quality care nurses or SMS services or web-based services or portal services. That is something that we can see, even though it's part of the integrated care concept or the whole approach, that is something that, as many other, multi-channel approaches, is something that takes maybe 3 or 4 to get a good ROI on. But everything is aiming on trying to see if integrated care could or should be the standard, and make sure and see if we can be able to provide a new revenue model or revenue stream for the company, and make sure that actually the patient by the end, either themselves or via their own peers, push for the patients to pay for the service they will be provided. Okay. So that has been a successful project so far.
Okay. I have a question here. I'm just trying to find it again, Per. How did you manage to change the mindset within your company from share of voice to more outcomes-based selling? So internally, how did you actually get everybody behind this project and getting everybody in the same direction? Because I imagine there's a lot of people to readdress.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is actually something that is, of course, an ongoing. I think, first of all, it all comes down to really putting everyone's mindset from group management all the way down. I think this is something that's going to take absolutely years still to really reach out into the full organization. The whole part of integrated care or patient programs, that is, of course, something that patient solution teams or brand teams are running on the side, even though in the given countries, the reps are also involved in supporting the process. But as we have set up a patient engagement team which focuses on patient support programs, that, of course, needs to be aligned with the parts that I'm working with, which is, you say, everything else, linking to the stakeholders or the management of the stakeholder universe. And trying to visualize, which is still something that we are working on, what it actually means and how this go hand in hand with how the reps functions needs to go hand in hand with the patient support parts or the patient engagement part. It needs to be forced. It needs to be a little bit of carrot and a little bit of whip, but still something that you really need just to make sure that you are persistent in approaching. If you really would like to go this way, it's not the easy way, absolutely not. But for us, it means that we have created for our product patient promises where we actually need to deliver upon, and then that drills down all the way to even down to a single rep, what that actually means that he or she needs to be doing or delivering.
Okay. Have you managed to, a question literally asked 2 seconds ago in response to that is, patient-centered organizational blueprints are often oversized and somehow redundant. How do you keep the organization lean and efficient? I just thought this would be a very interesting question given the amount of cost control that most companies are having to operate under at the moment.
I think this is a little bit of going all in. We have decided that this is the way we want to go, and that means that we invest heavily in this. As you say, yes, it needs to be balanced, but you could say this also needs to be balanced that we actually need to let go of old habits and old traditional way of working. It means that brand teams and sales teams need to change and reprioritize. It also means that you need to look into how you resource allocate and how you free up, give yourself freedom to operate or free up capital for new initiatives. But it is costly, but if you really would like to go this way, then it is an investment to start with, which we, of course, hope will be a new business model for us, which we are, of course, aiming for.
Okay. And just a couple of very specific things, if you can answer these ones quickly. People have asked about geographical as a factor. Does it work better in some areas and not others? And also about health literacy. Does that does that really affect health outcomes when you're trying a lot of this activity, or is that not so much a factor?
I think it actually works everywhere where we have set it up. I believe, or as we can see, you need to differentiate depending on the situations and the opportunities that you have in different countries. We can see that setting up patient initiatives in China, there we can see that in hospitals where we have patient initiatives compared to hospitals where we don't have it, we actually increased 14% in sales directly just after launching these kind of initiatives. So, but the initiatives in China are, of course, different to the ones that we are doing in the US or are doing in the UK, for example. So it needs to be a local run operation and fit it to the opportunities and the situations that you have in a local country.
Okay, thank you. Let me come back to Tyrone. I imagine you've been biting your tongue for several minutes, as you probably have a strong opinion on some of these things as well. Because we have so many questions on outcomes, on adherence, and on measurement, can you, I don't know if you've got anything to add or to highlight that you'd like to sort of say, as if you were directing somebody towards trying to do this for the first time, what advice would you give them, Tyrone?
Thank you. First of all, I think someone had asked the question in terms of how do you get the institutional support to do these types of programs. I believe that it's difficult for any one person or department to do these types of initiatives as a tactic, and rather it should be a strategy that is endorsed by the commercial leadership at the highest level. And I do believe that most commercial leadership teams are much aware of the imbalance of the promotion dollars in most companies, that we if you do the math, we actually allocate today way too many dollars for traditional promotion versus the kinds of approaches that we're discussing on this phone. So I think most audiences, most people are willing to have that conversation. I think what you now have to do is to bring proof points, white papers, or best practice examples, much like we've noted on this call, back to your leadership team to help them understand the benefits from that. The last thing I'll speak to is in regards to different markets. I do believe that these approaches, first and foremost, will have the greatest opportunity for impact in your more mature markets, because those markets are the ones that are struggling the most in terms of looking for differentiators among companies and brands in those respective markets. In some of the less developed markets, I think one of the challenges is not so much literacy as much as it is infrastructure in order to carry out some of these types of approaches. So it makes it a little harder to do for the kinds of investments that we want to make.
Excellent. We just to let the audience know, we've got about 10 minutes left. We will be able to give you a recording of everything you've heard before, so that will allow you to share it and re-listen to it. So don't worry about that. Moving on, I've got a couple of questions. Well, I want Dick to answer these if possible. Lots of people are asking, who is the customer? And as a secondary question to that, they're asking who should pay for this. Who is the patient? Who is the person? And in Dick's specific example, do the doctors have to pay to be a part of the program that you've developed?
I didn't get your first question.
The first question is who should be the customer in all of this?
Okay. Well, the one who is paying for the software is the doctor himself. And if we are talking about the aggregated data, the anonymized data, then it's the care group who is paying for it. The care group is also be paid by the healthcare insurer, so he can. In the payment, there is always a part for software for IT, and also the doctor gets reimbursed for his IT. So the doctor is the one who is buying the standard software. That means the engine and standard dashboards. But there is another customer, so to say, for the IT company who is selling this software that are other parties, so to say. It can be, for example, a healthcare insurer who wants its own dashboard or its own reporting items, reporting data. It can also be another pharmaceutical company who is designing its own dashboard for specific projects. So the primary customer is the doctor who is buying the basic engine and the standard software, the standard tools.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Dick, do you use existing electronic medical records as a source? And perhaps after you've answered that, the others can express whether or not they consider these to be an enabler to expanding the pharma value proposition beyond the pill.
Yes, we if I understand your question correctly, the data come from the doctor system itself. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's very clear.
Yes, so it's rough data, and it's important in this software.
Okay. So perhaps to pair, I mean, do you guys at Leo use existing aggregated data a lot in the work that you're doing?
I think actually we are struggling a little bit with that. Of course, on a local level, we have some access to aggregated data. We are also doing patient outcome-based studies with all products at the moment, so we will receive a lot of data in the time to come. But working with patient insights, or actually, I think it's more important to see from all data. I think if we look back on the data that we have after the last 20 years, data is not the issue in most cases. It's transforming it into insights, which actually gives meaning for the brand teams or the solution teams. That is actually the trick. Because I believe that a lot of the data is something that we have already from studies or from market research or buying data over the years from different kind of sources. So it's more about transforming it into insights, which is the trick.
Okay. Tyrone, someone agrees with the macro variables, agreeing how your customers are more easily identified and expressed and appreciated. But someone feels that this must be very true in the hospital setting, but not so much in retail settings and other settings. Can you provide any clarity there over whether this works in particular environments better than others?
So yes. First of all, I think you have to think geographically first. So many countries outside of the U.S., it's not only about the individual practitioner, but the groups that practice connected in a connected way. Specifically in the U.S., we find that physician groups are very much in alignment with the approach that my two colleagues have described on this call. It absolutely works with physician groups. And then for individual practitioners, I actually have worked with two pharma companies that work directly with individual practitioners, and they have found a way to go beyond just their product or their pill, if you will, and they have associated a solution with their product that is allowing physicians to track individual patient results in a timely way. One company working through the use of electronic medical records. The other company, they built a solution within their product itself that collects data that it's able to give to the physician, that allows the physician to manage, yes, holistic at a population level, but more specifically, intervening with individual patients on a real-time basis. So it absolutely can be done with individual practitioners, and depending on the market you're in.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, so if you haven't asked that last burning question, and you can do, then this is your final chance. I just want to remind people that the recordings will be available, and that they should look out for the Barcelona event that we are running, but also that we have two more webinars taking place actually in the next couple of weeks. And if we could quickly pop up those details on the screen. We have one webinar which is on the role of MSLs and KOLs, which is taking place on October the 10th. That's the bottom one on your screen. And just next week, we have one on October the 4th, all about multi-channel marketing, another very hot topic for anybody working in the commercial area, where we've got some real experts speaking there as well. Both of those are obviously free. Copy down those URLs or go to them right now to make sure that you don't miss out on those. I'm afraid you're going to have to sign up again properly for those, as that's the system that we're using. But do please not only sign up, but also if you have any colleagues that would find those things interesting, it is free. Do let them know about those. Right, so let's have a look back at my little questions panel. Have we got any learning takeaways from the approach? This is a question for Dick. Have we got any financial benefits to company and health provider receiver, or is it really too early now?
Well, it is still rather early, but what we see is that the reputation is going up for GSK because of this, what we're doing. But the only thing, and that's what the main thing is, that we were not accepted as an IT provider, as a vendor. So it only started to fly, so to say, from the moment we brought it to an IT company who was going to do the marketing and the sales and the support. So when it was out of our hands, so we were not involved in data, it was acceptable for the general practitioners or practitioners as such. Second is that if you bring it to the market through a vendor, it means that it also open for other users. That was something we had to accept and we had to manage mentally, so to say. But I think that till now it's going quite well, and as long as quality is being served, quality of life, quality of patient treatment, I think there's no problem when other companies are using the software by creating new queries, new dashboards, whatsoever.
Excellent. I think those are some very choice words you've used there to summarize your approach. Does Tyrone or Per have anything final to say? I'm going to unmute you both. Do you have anything final to say in terms of the principles or going forward from here before we sign off?
This is Tyrone.
Sorry, Tyrone. You go ahead.
I would say, thank you, Per. I would say that my final principle would be that it is really in the best interest of every company online to look at their allocation of their promotion dollars and see what they can reallocate away from traditional approaches to non-traditional approaches, much as we've discussed here. The data is pretty clear, at least in the more mature markets, that your salespeople are getting less and less time in front of the physician. You have to find alternative ways, and if you're going to use physicians, you must begin to arm your salespeople with more service model orientation and insight that's going to help them to be able to get more time with physicians.
Okay. Per, anything final, quickly?
Yeah, I can just add that, I mean, setting up and offering complete patient solutions will be the way forward for most of the pharma companies. And linking it to Tyrone, I mean, it will include also in the future different kind of customer-facing units with a broad set of competencies. But most of all, to really deliver on the challenger side, just linking it back to Tyrone.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Obviously, huge thanks to the three speakers who agreed to come and share with us today. That was very kind of them indeed. We, as I say, will be continuing a lot more discussions like this in future sessions. I personally found today's session one of the most interesting that I've encountered, and I hope that we've fulfilled our aim of providing both the practical examples and also talking about some of the key principles required when going after this approach, and also shown that really 60 to 70% of you are, we're talking pharma companies here, are pushing in this way. And I think all except 2% of pharma companies at least considering this as a major priority going forward, which is obviously great for patients and hopefully ultimately will provide you with the ROI you need yourselves. As I say, we're going to send a recording, and do check out those other two webinars which take place very soon. For the time being, I want to say thank you from myself and also to my colleagues Lucy and Tashani, whose names you may have seen before. They've been brilliant in organising today and getting everybody on board. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your days, and good luck with it all. Thanks a lot. Bye.